Welcome to Green and Gold FC. I'm joined here by Jake from Scouted. Very interested to learn more about scouting. He wrote a very interesting article about the A-League and how young we are, how technically we're looking pretty good, but physically there's some areas which we can really improve. How are you going, Jake?
Yeah, really good. Excited to be on here. Learning more about the A-League as well. As I said, as you mentioned there, I saw like the zoomed out perspective of it, noticed that it was a really young league, started looking at some of the young players that had been making their debut, what they might offer. But I also do need that more context of what is actually happening, and always interested to learn that side of it as well. So looking forward to this.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'd love to, tell you about my passion about some of the Australian football as well as learning more from you. So let's start with some biographical stuff. Like, how do you become a scout? Is there an ad in the paper saying scouts wanted? Please apply here. I know you had a non-traditional path. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so very much missed all the adverts if they were there in the newspapers. And this Scouted itself as a business was born out of a group of friends that enjoyed the idea of being able to spot talent before anyone else could spot it, which is also heavily influenced by Football Manager, which I think as that game has become so popular, there are actually genuine stories of how people have used interest in that and managed to apply it to break into the industry. But I started helping grow Scouted's just social platform, because when I left university, I got a job at Squawka as a social media sort of assistant. Um, and then alongside that, I would work a Squawka shift, cover games. That was a stat-based media website. And then I would help sort of apply that knowledge to Scouted and just do it through a young player lens. Then we started writing magazines, both digital and physical copies. The digital ones that started used to be lots of players and trying to put them all in one PDF for people to read about. Then we became more focused, and each edition of the physical magazine that we eventually had to stop producing because COVID and shipping costs. That physical magazine used to focus on 30 or so players, designed to be a centerpiece on a coffee table as much as it was information about each player. And then from there, and sort of since COVID, we've managed to build a reputation of using that track record of identifying a lot of players, being able to spot the scalable skills, notice where the particular markets and leagues that seem to produce good talent, working with people like Skill Corner, which is the article that you referenced. That's like industry standard tracking data. So we've been able to tell our stories, which has always been key to Scouted. It's not just the cold, hard development lines of players. It's about the stories and how every single player is different. We've now been sort of managing how to actually break into the industry ourselves and apply everything that we've learned by using data like skill corners to show a track record in spotting players before other people have spotted them. So we've come full circle. We're just doing it now with more data and an even more professional setting.
So you mentioned that you work for Squawka, and Squawka is very interesting because Who Scored was around about that time. They also exist in the industry. But I think Squawka were the first international platform which actually gave ratings to Australian players. And so that was very interesting to seeing how good a player was, whether they're overrated or underrated compared to my perception or fans' perception. And these days you also have FootMob. These are really, really interesting platforms because obviously I like to use them as well. But some people worry about there's too many health hazards in using this. How seriously should we take these ratings? I, for example, recently wrote an article comparing what is the average foot mode rating of under 23s in the A League that get regular game time to see, are we playing too many youth or playing too few? I actually found out that actually people had to overperform their foot mode, the average foot mode rating of the league in order to get regular minutes if you're a young player, which made me wonder if we're playing too little. But are these just ratings? Are these good enough to use on that macro level, or would you recommend some health warnings?
Yeah, I think they've changed massively. So from that 10 years ago where Squawka started, I remember when I started getting into I never worked on developing the ratings, but when we used to challenge them and interrogate them, basically pass accuracy just seemed to cannon anyone to the top of the list. And given how football changed, it became you'd get the Man City centre backs starting to get 90% passing accuracy, and they would always be the highest rated players. So obviously that was very early iteration. And since everyone's understanding of football and what is valuable on the pitch has changed, and the metas have changed, the algorithms have followed that. And SofaScore in particular, we use that a lot. I use it to just track players in terms of there's no way I can watch every single match around the world all the time. So I use it to follow the young players that I've spotted elsewhere, get a feel for what they are producing in a match, how consistent they are. Because although the ratings are dependent on if you score a goal, it will look like you've played well. If you lose duels or make an error, you just get punished massively, and that's not necessarily a fair representation of the game. So they are still very much based on the result of the match, but I think you can definitely use them as a starting point for those macro sort of analyses of leagues, because it is a data point. So as long as you understand what goes into the data point, how they're calculated, and apply that knowledge to it rather than just take them as they are and then say this player is good, this player is bad, you can definitely learn stuff from them. And if you see a player that's played 9 in 10 consecutive games, there is obviously something that you should be looking for. So they can be at the very least instructive of where to look. And data and metrics are a good way to accelerate your ability to discover players, whether that's just being like, this person has had the most shots in the league and they're only 21 years old. Let's look at how scalable the shots he's getting are. What is the environment that is providing him to take those shots? All of those will never be communicated in a rating, but you can definitely use it as a jumping off point to start analysis and build a perception of a player. But it's probably not robust enough to say SofaScore rating good or bad. That's going to be my decision.
So tell me, is there a danger that overanalysis can destroy people's love of the game? I know some older fans of the game complain about that a lot. How do you keep that passion alive while having a really analytic, guts and nuts and bolts view of the game?
I think for me in particular, there's definitely that risk. And at Squawker, because I would cover matches and sort of have them on but never really watch them, it built a sort of habit of always just looking to see like what the narrative is, and then try and sort of, it was a social media company and that's what I worked in. So I tried to just basically compound everything that people were talking about. So towards the end of that, and the reason I left Squawker was because the social media aspect was very much like draining my love for it, because everything felt like I had to find a reason or build uproar or hype over something, even when it wasn't there. So since stepping back, I've found a good balance in terms of at the weekend, I won't do the analysis. I will just watch games to watch them and enjoy them again. And then in the week, I know there are obviously midweek games, Champions League, etc. But I've tried to just separate the analysis from the watching the matches, and I try not to do them at the same time, because again, on social media, you'll see every single micro action analyzed, and that is very useful, and that is the sort of stuff you need to do in scouting. But nothing replaces the sort of live feeling you see. Like you know when a player is playing well when you're watching it, if you're a fan of the game. And yes, it can be emotionally charged, but then that's part of the analysis to then challenge it afterwards. So I've fallen back in love with watching football and especially playing it. And I think not feeling like you need to do everything as it happens is a way to do that. There's so many tools available now to rewatch a game that you should try and enjoy it when it's happening, and then the actual analysis and the data, it needs to be processed anyway from a data perspective. So there's no value in me trying to draw a conclusion as quickly as possible from a match. And I very much enjoyed doing the zoomed out analysis of matches rather than the minute by minute keeping up with what's happening, because that immediately gets forgotten, or there's important context that gets missed.
Yeah, it's good advice. When watching the Australian national team, the Socceroos, the first time I watch it, I'll get swept up in the emotion, the narratives. The coach shouldn't have selected that player. That's a terrible. Oh, they should have done this. This player's playing bad or whatever. Just let yourself go, enjoy the game, and then second time, okay, now I'm watching it to see, okay, how can we improve? What was doing? Oh, actually, now I see why the coach played that player. So one thing I thought was really interesting about your article was the macro picture it painted. It showed that we have technically improved a lot. We used to be so self-conscious about how technically far we're behind European nations and really, really self-conscious about if you told an Aussie that they have a great engine, that they can run all day, that they all that sort of thing, that they have Aussie DNA, they could try their best, all that sort of thing, that we'd feel really embarrassed about that. We'd get really self-conscious. And we wanted to be technical. We introduced so much emphasis on small-sided games and improving technically and scouting for the most technical players. And your analysis was the first hard data I saw, which seemed to suggest that maybe we're falling behind physically. So I want to go through some of those physical attributes and why these physical attributes are the ones you look at. So there's 11 criteria which you look at. Some of them are obvious, but some of them are not. So running distance, HSR distance, sprint distance, HSRs, sprints, PSV 99, and so forth. Could you go through those 11 criteria and tell us why these criteria, what they are, and why would we care about that?
Yeah. So again, just to emphasize, this is skill corner data, which is all done by sort of video feeds, and they have a lot of computer science behind it that tracks angles of players and registers all of this data through video feeds of matches. Um, Through using their data now for 2 years, we sort of get you build up a profile of what each one tells you about a player. So, for example, running distance, HSR, which means high speed running, and sprint distance, they're all just different thresholds of speed in which distance is covered. So, running distance is its own thing. It's not like the whole distance. And Australia was actually profiled well for that. So, that immediately tells me that players are covering ground, but it's done leisurely is the wrong word, but relative to other leagues, the players are covering distance and able to get around the pitch without having to get into these higher bands. So high speed running is between 20 kilometers an hour and 25, and sprinting is anything above 25. So with Australia, what you saw immediately, and then again, I would encourage anyone to go back and look at the article, but I did a very probably not concrete like Z scoring graph scale of just a few leagues, which I'm very aware is a small sample, but it does give you an immediate picture. And again, every step of my analysis, I then interrogate afterwards. But this was a way for me to identify where the big differences were. And again, if you apply them to more leagues, the differences will look smaller. But as an example, Australia and in the A League, the players are covering a fair amount of distance. The huge difference is that the higher band you get up to, the quicker they drop off. So they are within the 6 leagues that I picked here, which was the A League, the EFL Championship in England, Japanese First League, Scottish Premiership, Danish Superliga, and Major League Soccer. Those leagues were picked based on sort of transfer trends we were noticing. Australia was second for the running distance behind Denmark, but then you went to sprint and they were bottom by quite a way away from the average. So this immediately told me that it's just the intensity, to use a sort of catch-all term, that is the huge difference in this league, and that would be the biggest barrier to someone making an immediate jump. Because yes, they might still have that engine that you said that you were embarrassed about, and that the endurance is there to run, but how quickly can you shift up to that maximum gear, come back down, and be able to repeat that? That is the big thing from a Premier League perspective. That is the big thing that we've noticed lots and lots is running distance. The Premier League ranks quite low. I never try to use bad because it's all contextual environment stuff, but it won't look like it ranks highly for running distance because the players are either walking or they're sprinting, to use a very basic analogy. Whereas Australia, it's that perpetual running. So they are always moving, but it's not really done quote unquote at a high intensity. And that's the big difference that we've seen with leagues is the ability to scale up into that top band and go back down is the most demanding. And if you've ever done any sport, you'll know that you can be fit and you can do a 25K run, but as soon as you have to sprint back and recover on a five-a-side, yeah, it's hard. It takes a long time to get your breath back and still perform at a level. So that's the sort of difference that I noticed most.
So one of the criteria was really interesting. I had to rack my brain why this would be why this would be a criteria to look at. Was decelerations. Is this because you want people in your top levels in order to squeeze and shut down time and space that people have on the ball to be able to sprint as fastly as they can towards the ball carrier and then stop rather than giving away a foul? Is that the sort of thinking, or is this more of a general measure of agility?
Yeah, I think it's both. Someone that's written a few guest articles for Scouted before, called Billy Carpenter, and he's an Arsenal specific writer, but does incredible long reads. He recently did something about athleticism and used the exact example you've used there about how decelerating is actually extremely scalable skill for elite players. And he used N'Golo Kante as an example when he was at Chelsea, the ability to jump into a press, but as you said, decelerate, not to be beaten by a movement. Um, and also use Sadio Mane at Liverpool pressing from the front, being able to do multiple pressing triggers at once by closing a player, decelerating, changing direction to then go and press someone else. And then previous work that we'd done on it, Stephen Ganavas, who is now a scout in for a top five league team, and also an Australian, one of the co-founders of Scouted, he did a lot of the skill corner work before I joined in full time. And he seemed to really enjoy decelerations as a proxy for agility, and did a lot of work where some of your best stop-start wingers, the players that can um, stand up a fullback and then burst away. Obviously, the accelerations are there, but the decelerations sort of compounded that profile, the ability to go quick and come back down very quickly, especially for those, as I said, wingers and fullbacks. It's a very good skill to be able to not get thrown around by someone that can manipulate the ball. So decelerations is something that we always consider. Again, it can be stylistic rather than just, if you do lots of decelerations, you are good. But we found that, yeah, it's a barometer for agility, and accelerations in general seem to be very closely aligned to pressing metrics. So again, there's no exact correlation, and again, it's dangerous to do just correlation is causation and things like that. Looking, if someone's high for accelerations and decelerations, I already know that when I look at the pressing stuff, I'm probably going to see them fairly high up, because it's the nature of that on pitch activity. And a lot of the stuff I do with the data analysis is trying to tell you what those physical stuff relate to on the pitch. So, like you said, decelerations is usually a good proxy for people's ability or their proclivity to press the opposition.
So when I look at these graphs, it only goes from -2 to +2 as your scores. I'm guessing, and I'm saying this as a physicist, those are standard deviations, right?
Yeah.
So for those at home, those can be deceptive because you can say, well, I'm only -2 rather than -1.5 or whatever. It's not that big a deal. But standard deviations, these are, if you're lower, it means you're exponentially lower, right? You get exponentially worse as you get further and further from the middle. So is this something that is, we are actually quite, we're bottom of the list for 7 out of 11 of the physical criteria. Is this something which is a real big impediment, do you think, to a lot of our players getting a step up?
Yeah. So again, I just want to really emphasize that obviously the exponential differences are exacerbated by the fact that it is a smaller sample. But as I said, it still gives you a rough look. They're still going to be worse, but it just depends on then what sample you use. Um, so yeah, in terms of the ability for players to step up, remember that is just capturing the average as well. So the one sort of positive would be that perhaps if I were to do this again, or if people wanted to explore further analysis, is maybe you start to look at the physical level of the younger players that are breaking through versus the older players, and does this new generation have a different physical sort of makeup to the older players that are playing? Um, because the whole idea of making a league younger is that you're introducing the players that have gone through the better training and the better academies quicker, so that the level gets raised. And it won't be until those players themselves are 26. Obviously, the best ones are gonna leave, but the idea is that you are changing the makeup of the league through introducing these players so young. So this is a snapshot now, and we're probably, if you looked at a graph of how the league's going to develop, we're at the lowest point because it's got so young. Or it may get younger, but I feel like we're at a very young age. I think some of the research that I used to sort of form the backdrop it was from the official PFA in Australia. They did a report on the league. They do a seasonal report, and they communicated that I think over 50% of the minutes were going to players under 25. So that's a very young benchmark. And it'll be interesting that when these players now go over the 25 threshold, is the level going to be raised by their improved conditioning in academies, their improved technical level, as you said? So at the moment, the average A League player, and that's important to consider. This is not a everyone's bad. This is the average A League output, so you need to take that with a pinch of salt. But the likelihood of an average A League player being plonked into one of these other leagues and finding it a step up is big. However, if we see a young player that's showing the ability to actually perform at a high level in all these metrics, one, we need to realize that, okay, that's still relative to A League, so how good is it? But also it shows signs that that improved conditioning and training at the academy level is already having an effect on their ability to match other leagues' output.
So there's been a couple of theories about what could be behind our physical underperformance. One is the one I mentioned before, that maybe it's just an underemphasis on physical ability and physical development. But a couple of others which might be mitigating circumstances is we play in the summer in a very hot country. So some people have said, well, maybe that's why there's less intensity. And another idea people have had is just we have a really short season. It's 26 rounds this year, 27 last year. Could those be factors? And is there any way to tell whether there's other factors such as scouting and the at a young age in which players go into the academy? Or alternative explanation could be that we aren't doing enough strength and conditioning and developing people's young players' athletic ability.
Yeah, I think the weather definitely will have an impact. Again, you see it at the World Cups when they're in hot countries, and it is hard to reach the same standards as when it's in a very neutral 10 degrees. It is much easier to reach those sprint thresholds consistently and cool back down without the risk of actual sort of damage as well. It's dangerous to be sprinting around like that when it is hot. So it will have an effect, but what we saw with the Premier League is that it becomes a cycle of, like, as soon as one team puts real emphasis on conditioning, and again, this could be relative to the environment. So as soon as one team says, well, we will start increasing the intensity of our play, but do it for shorter periods of time, or we can't do it the whole game. As soon as there is an example of a team that focuses on that doing well, both in and out of possession, it's just a domino effect of all the teams needing to focus on that. So again, Pep Guardiola and Manchester City in the Premier League showed that, yes, they control the ball for 60% or 70% when they first started, but they were always characterized by the fact that everyone sprinted back immediately whenever they did lose the ball. Arsenal are doing it now. Arteta recently saying about Eze that he's a quality player, but he was never going to play if he didn't put in those same efforts out of possession. So again, when it's hot, it's really hard to lose the ball and then feel like you've got to run back in 40 degrees to try and win it back. But as soon as one team gains success through placing a lot of emphasis on that, it will usually have a chain reaction. So I think, because the reading that I've done, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, A lot of the A leagues push into the young players is done from a league-wide level. It's an awareness that young players will command the biggest transfer fees because there is potential that people are buying rather than just a definitive ability. Um, it's also cheaper because they are developing as young players, so the wages when you start are lower than if you're buying marquee players coming in. Um, so that's a good sign because they're pushing that as a league-wide strategy. And then the hope is that, like you said, there is now emphasis in these academies that have developed. There is an emphasis on, right, how do we train explosive speed and the ability to accelerate and decelerate rather than just getting people to run laps and do really well in bleep tests? That's a really sort of generalization of what may change. But as soon as they notice that, okay, in order to develop more exports for this specific league, the athleticism is different. Now, that needs to start being trained at a younger age, and the improvements in the academy should echo those changes. But it's just such a long, every year, if you've got 4 players that are good enough technically, then also have that new physical grounding to reach new levels, then 2 of them get sold. That will take a long time for the effects to be seen in the league itself. So there's that balance now of like, yes, they may be producing those players, but they are just getting snapped up so quickly that the league is still lagging from having those players make an impact in the A League itself.
Yeah, one of the most interesting thing about your article, and also, as you said, this change that we have in the A League, where we have to think about not new market, not just being people who show up in the stands or people who watch on TV, but also European clubs. They're part of the customers who are trying to buy players, and we have to try and please them and try and develop players to their taste. And that could potentially lead to a change in style and how we play because we're trying to produce the type of player which is of interest to top buyers. What's interesting about this is if you just told people that, okay, they're technically good, but not physically good enough, then probably a lot of A-League clubs would just say, well, we just need to do more laps. We need to, maybe if we want to keep the technique, do laps with the ball at your feet, or we need to put them in the gym or something like that. But it's really interesting to find that these are the types of data that correlate to stepping up. This agility data, these acceleration, decelerations, these top sprints. Do you have any data which says how much there's an ability to improve? So suppose you come from one league to another and it has a higher physical standard in some of these metrics. Do players, individual players, can they improve at a late age, or is this something that you have to scout and develop at a young age?
Yeah, we don't have any concrete tracking of that, of a player being signed with poorer attributes, but my theory would be that it's not a be all and an end all. The main thing is not necessarily about the player. As I said, the players that there will be players in this A League that have the good physical attributes. It's more the environment and how long it will take for you to get. If you're a quick player and you're playing in a league that's not quick, all of a sudden you've got so much more time than everyone else. Every decision is easy to make. It's easier to execute your skills because you've always got that larger degree of separation. It's more about everyone else around you all of a sudden closing the space. So that's why you never see players, especially from some emerging leagues, make an immediate impact because all of a sudden you have got no time compared to having all the time. And the gifts that the physical gifts that enabled you to stand out in that league. For example, if you are quick in the A League, you might be a middling quick player in the Premier League, for example. And all of a sudden, that attribute that defined your style of play is eliminated. So the scouting is about how much is this environment allowing them to be better than they are based on the platforming of that one athletic attribute. How much will that change when they're put into this Premier League environment? But I appreciate that deviates from your question. I would say that you can develop physically. That's not a limiting factor. If you are slow, you are not going to get quick. Those you will have general physical attributes that you can get quicker, but you can't all of a sudden change someone's physical makeup. And And that's even from you can't just make a child quick. Like all of those things, you can give them a stronger base, and you can give them the ability to repeat what they are good at more often. But the scouting perspective is more about like, how much is this weaker league giving them the ability to look good? If we pluck them out, will they be able to beat the player as often when all of a sudden the fullbacks, they're all 15% quicker than the ones they were facing in the A League? So it's more about, again, you might have already deduced from the Eze mention that I'm an Arsenal fan, and one of the first skill corner pieces I did was talking about how the Premier League's transitional game state and the need for these sprints is breeding the search for a new type of forward, one that is big, that can match all of the 6'4" centre backs that play in the league. But rather than the traditional target man that would stay still, they are able to repeatedly run in behind at a high speed. And Victor Gyökeres profiled as one of the best examples of this player in Portugal. However, what the data will never capture is, yes, he ticks all the stylistic marks and he reaches the speeds we need to reach. But when he's under more pressure and when people are closer in speed to him, does he have the fundamental technical skills, the ability to use the body, the close control to still gain the same advantages? And we saw at the beginning that it was a big adaptive phase for him. And again, he's playing better now, but there is still the clear difference of like, okay, yes, he had all of these physical gifts that enabled him to just score. I think he won the European Golden Shoe, which is pretty incredible from someone in the Primera Liga. But as soon as the spaces get smaller, as soon as everyone else gets faster, the flaws in his game are exacerbated, and his one immediate superpower that enabled him to dominate a league actually becomes less effective. So then the scouting recruitment team need to be like, right, how much less effective will it be, and is it still effective enough to make an impact? And again, the jury's still out. I'm biased because I obviously used him as a big exploration. That I think he's not the world class striker, but he gives Arsenal a dimension that they didn't have, which is that sprinting in behind. And he might improve over the next few seasons as he then gets used to that league. But that's my sort of overarching idea of like what you're looking for here. You're not being like, oh, this guy, we can just make him faster. You're saying, what is he good at? How does that change in this new environment? And will it change to an extent that it's actually going to be eliminated as a superpower, and then he doesn't really have something that separates him from other players?
So one thing I mentioned is scouting at a young age and finding the players with the correct physical attributes in the first place. And how much can you change it if you have the wrong physical attributes? So it sounds like there's limits on how much you can change. One thing is, are there limits on how much we can find the players with the correct physical attributes in an environment like Australia where we're competing with other sports? Do you know how much overlap there is between the sort of physically outstanding player that would be, say, in rugby league or AFL compared to football? So, rugby league, I could tell you that the gold standard physical attribute that scouts are looking for in young players is the ability to change direction without losing speed. I don't know if that's a physical attribute which is of interest to football scouts, but is there enough of a separation that we can still get the elite athletes which have football specific attributes even at a young age in order to not be too handicapped by the fact that we're competing with other sports?
So again, I'm a complete novice, or probably even less than that for AFL stuff. But in terms of that particular attribute, yes, it's going to have transferability. The only thing is, and this sounds silly as it's forming in my head, obviously changing direction at speed with a ball at your feet while you're doing it is completely different to being able to run. And again, I know there is still elements of using your feet, but it's not constantly, you're not changing direction. The only time you're going to be changing direction at high speed without losing speed is like a curved run in behind. So that's useful. Like maybe it will breed more strikers or players that are effective off the ball. But I think there's that contact with the foot that will mean that it's very hard to, even if you were an incredible athlete that was the fastest, that had the best stamina, was agile as well, but you'd never had the ball at your feet, it would be hard to immediately transfer that to football. So I think you need that technical grounding first. However, the only sort of potential transferable thing, and this is me using an extremely small sample again, but something to explore, was that two of the most expensive A-League transfers, and they both went to direct to Premier League clubs, were two goalkeepers. I didn't know if because of Australia's top sports, cricket as well, for example, hand-eye coordination aspect of it, is there might be a process within when these players are developing at school. You're not the best cricketer, you're not the best AFL player. However, you're tall enough already, and also you've got the grounding in the hand-eye that means that if you actually started training to become a goalkeeper now, you could probably do well. That is, as I said, a very small baseline, but I think goalkeeper is a position where famously, like everyone says that no one starts out as a goalkeeper, and there are stories of people only becoming a goalkeeper at 14 years old when they realize they either grew out of their body. That's another thing that you can never predict for a player. A player that's incredible at dribbling at 12 years old because of their low center of gravity might have a growth spurt that eliminates all of their skills that they built up and have to get used to a new body, and actually makes them a worse player because the mechanics of a taller body means that you don't have that center of gravity to weave in and out of players. So the only thing when I was doing a brief look at where there is transferability is maybe, and I think Australian goalkeepers have always been to a decent standard in the world game as well anyway. There's probably more Australian goalkeepers that have had prolonged periods in the Premier League and higher leagues than other positions. So I didn't know if that was maybe a link there, that because of that constant exposure to using hands rather than feet, as soon as they spot someone that grows tall, they probably say, you're not going to make it in this sport, but we can probably get you to be a pro goalkeeper in 4 years because they'll have that dedicated training. But I don't know if that matches any theories you've had, or if that sounds completely completely silly. But that was something I just thought it was interesting, that the only two A-League to Premier League transfers that were two of the most expensive were goalkeepers.
That's very interesting. We do have, of course, Matt Ryan as the only player that's in the modern era that's managed to go from the A League into having 4 years and counting of consistent football in the top five leagues in Europe. So one thing we've seen in Australia is some players, they get picked up by a massive club and then you just never see them again because they'll be playing at a very, very low league for a very, very long time. Sometimes they'll go after only a few games. Others will spend a few seasons. Some players go to a medium club and try and use that as a step up, getting regular game time if they're in, say, a second division or in, say, Denmark, rather than trying to go to the Premier League or the Bundesliga. Can you give any advice on when is the best time to go? How do you know you're ready? And I get that some of this is out of control. You can only deal with the offers you have. But when do you know that an offer is coming from a place which is such a high level that that's going to impact your career, or alternatively, such a low level that's not going to help you improve?
Yeah, I think always as fans, we sort of almost sometimes forget that if they're doing this to also become professionals and make a career out of it, sometimes you do have to take that high profile move because it will change your life through the salary that you receive. So there's a fine line between thinking, right, if I've got an offer from Arsenal, but I will never play for Arsenal, the exposure to the training, the salary that I receive, the care and the development that I get, is that a better barometer for then future success when I do find my level, versus, as you've said, getting to Europe just to play at a lower level in order to move out. It is like a spectrum, and there will be examples of players that take the gamble to leave because there's so much data now and because everyone can scout every league. If you perform well, you will get noticed. It's really hard to be invisible in the modern era as a player, because there will always be a club watching a certain league. And if you're able to stand out for particular metrics, then you will at least get scouted internally. And whether that develops into a move is another thing. And it's definitely riskier. But also, the reason why you see big clubs sign a player and then they never play is because they are so rich that, again, referring to the record transfers, I think the record from the A League was €2 million, I think, for the record transfer. So for a club that's in the Big Five league, they can afford to take that risk because they either invest €2 million, they put them on their pathway of maybe loans, academies, maybe academy football for a year, depending how young they sign. Then they'll have a pathway of loans that scale up the level. If they ever don't reach Premier League level, for example, or the top five league level, they know that they will either recoup the €2 million because that's almost the going rate for anyone that's under 25 in European football, or they're never going to make a loss on that, which I'm always very wary of speaking like that when you're talking about human beings. And I don't like sort of boiling them down to that, but that is how they will look at it. If there is someone in the A League that is 10 times faster than everyone else and has already played senior football, there will be a club that's rich enough that takes that gamble and just signs them, because they can then look at them day to day. They can track them by their own internal metrics that they judge ability by. And as I said, the worst case scenario is that if they've had to invest €1 million, they're going to make that back, or it's so negligible that it doesn't even impact their finances. So I think that's why you'll see the players disappearing more often, is because the risk is so low versus a potential reward of, okay, this player actually is good enough to play, and we can either make 20 million off him or he'll actually impact us games ourselves. So that's why there's probably more lost players. But that's why it's interesting that clubs in MLS, and that's why I want different leagues to start noticing the A League as well, because again, the jump is not as big. And because you're going there younger, that exposure to senior football means that you probably do develop better. And I recently spoke to someone at StatsBomb who had previously worked at the City Group and at Bolton Wanderers. Now, I think they're in League One now. But they spoke about how if they were scouting a young player and they hadn't played any senior football by 18 years old, not regular, but if they hadn't been exposed to the first team squad, then the chances of them becoming the level that was required was very low. So I think when making moves, the right time to move is, you probably need one senior. It sounds very short, but if you can break into an A-League team at 17, 18, you'll probably play one senior season there regular. Um, if you've made the right impact and clocked the right metrics, or you've been noticed, it probably is good to accelerate that depending where it is. But I really do think, from the research that I did, I think this MLS pipeline is one that will develop massively, because MLS clubs in general were looking at younger players. They have obviously more complicated roster building rules. Under 22 players, they get a set amount, but they get benefits from having under 22 players. I can't remember the intricacies of it. It is very complicated, but there is an incentive to buy younger players. So all of a sudden, you've got this 16-year-old breaks into the A League, plays 5 games as his 16th year, has a full season as a 17, 18-year-old, makes a move to MLS. MLS now is proving that it can develop players to a level of the Big Five leagues, and that pipeline then develops of maybe not going straight to Europe, but going via MLS is something that could help develop players more consistently that are coming from that division.
So obviously the question about whether to go to a Big Five league straight away or to say somewhere like the MLS or Denmark or whatever first, that becomes simpler if you are just immediately good enough to start playing in the Big Five. So is that even theoretically possible to go from the A League to the Big Five if you hit the right metrics? Is it that you need to have that prior experience at a league with a higher physical intensity?
Yeah, there's 2 reasons. I think one, you need it just because it's a body of evidence, and the as we said, the gap at the moment is so big that Premier League clubs won't take the risk because they don't have to. So if you're the best player in the A League and you're clearly very highly rated, everyone said that you're going to be very good, and you go for €5 million to MLS, and it's a record transfer, and this has never been seen before. if you have one good season in MLS and you become as good as everyone thinks you are, and you could be Premier League standard, Premier League clubs now don't care about paying 20 million euros for someone. So it might contradict what I've said about them investing in youth, but they're so rich now that they can actually wait to be proven right or wrong. So they may have you on their radar when you make that first move, but the value of you proving that, okay, in a new environment that's closer to the Premier League levels, if you can prove to still the things that I mentioned earlier about like how impacted is your super skills, how much do they change when you're in an environment that's more competitive? If you've proven that you can still exhibit like your main skills, and there's no real drop off in your output in that higher intensity of the average player, then they will make the move. But they don't need to make the move immediately because they can afford it, and it is better for the player themselves to get that that season of professional men's football in these better leagues anyway. So personally, I think right now the jump is there's probably not many players that would be able to just go from A League to Premier League. But at the same time, we're even more unlikely to see it because the financial disparity means that they don't have to do that. And again, they could buy them and then loan them. That obviously saves them money, but it's so ridiculous now that they can just be like, oh yeah, okay, we might have to spend an extra 10 million now because that player is good. But to them, if they believe that they're that good, one, as soon as you then play in the Premier League, you can just get resold for 30 million anyway. The craziness of the transfer market and the ridiculous of the money and the wealth of the Premier League clubs in particular, that particular pipeline we're unlikely to see because the risk is so, it's not a high risk to buy someone from the A League, but like there's no need to do it because they would rather just see them perform well somewhere else and then be like, okay, yeah, we that development's helped them anyway, so now we're willing to pay 5 million rather than 2 million, which is still relatively nothing for them.
So one thing which I hear a lot in Australian fans circles is this perception that because Australia is not known for their football, that they might actually have to overcome additional hurdles of unconscious bias. So so like as an Aussie, if I'm coaching a cricket team and there's two equally good players and one of them is a young Indian boy, the other is a young Spanish boy, I'm probably going to, without realizing it, play the Indian boy is kind of how the thinking goes. And so if you have a Brazilian and an Australian, which is same level, maybe we have to be twice as good to be seen to get a go. Is there any truth in that? And secondly, has the degree of data in the game, both now physical data and also technical data, does that help reduce that? Or is this bias basically all in our heads?
I was going to say, I think you've pretty much nailed that cognitive bias is always going to impact people. And the more you can remove that, the better your decisions will be. And it's something that I consistently try to realign, and you don't want that to impact your decisions. And what I like about data is that depending how you're looking at it and what views you see it, you are not seeing anything until you actually look on the player. So all the data analysis and the players that I picked out in the A League, they were all first seen as green dots with no nationality, no height, no footedness, no background information. If a player is interesting, no matter, I will see them, and it's all based on that initial data interest. I'll never go. Obviously, you would scout Brazil. There are archetypal profiles within a league that will develop because of culture. So there's a reason that Brazilian players or Spanish players, Portuguese players, they play a lot of futsal and it's very technical. So yes, you may be more likely to find a technical player in those areas because the culture drives that. And whereas in England, you'll get someone with a really powerful shot and someone that's good in the air. Those are all factors that maybe will impact this type of player that you are more likely to come across. But I personally will never start my filtering and say remove Australian players, or that. I don't think that in the agencies and people making decisions, yes, you probably still have cognitive bias of that. But what's interesting about using the data first to build your shortlists is that shortlist is built on, well, the shortlist is built without any consideration of those things. The only thing that you know is the league they're in and probably their age if you've done a particular age filter. But the reason that I always look at the whole league without any age filters is because, one, I know them relative to everyone else. And two, if there's a 38-year-old next to the 19-year-old, that gives you a good point of difference of like, why is that potentially? Is that an environment thing? So I think the success of the articles that we've done at Scouted is because we always interrogate everything we see. But at the same time, there's no cognitive bias in how we're selecting players. If we see a player that looks interesting for whatever reason, whether that's through watching a match or through sort of running the data that we do, I can only speak for myself really on this, is that we don't see anything until we've actually said that they're good. And it's quite refreshing to be able to see a name without any of that cognitive bias creeping in, even if it, even if you're confident it doesn't exist. Maybe it does in every human, because we're humans after all. But I would hope now that, like I said, you can have a perception of the league, and you might think the league is weaker, but I would like to think that people are using that rather than being like, he is Australian, therefore he is not going to be good enough. And as you said, the likelihood of professional football players from Australia is less because there's other sports that take priority or whatever. That is a fact probably, but it shouldn't then rule out the fact that an Australian player could be good. I would hope so, but maybe faith in humanity is always overemphasized. But I would hope that now, because of the data that's available, those things are getting removed much quickly.
So moving on to specific players that you've seen in the A-League, because you gave some profiles and players which you thought were good. Were there any players which caught your eye and said, well, if this person reaches their potential, they could play in the Big Five? Were there any players you saw with elite potential?
So the one player that he was only briefly mentioned in this, but someone I identified in another article, was Ocon Engsler, that plays for Melbourne or Sydney. I watched, can't
Sydney
remember
FC.
now. It's Sydney, yeah, because I watched him. They played Melbourne 2 days ago, and I watched that game to tune in to sort of again test what I'd been seeing in the data to see. And again, immediately he has those cognitive biases. Like he's a tall guy, he covers ground a lot. So I wanted to see again like how he was covering the ground, and what stood out to me data wise was his passing. He's a very progressive, forward thinking passer. But what impressed me when I watched him was, yes, it wasn't that we need the context of how fast he was doing it, but he was covering lots of ground and he was making lots of fouls. But the huge gaps that I saw, like in between the midfield and the front line, he was having to do a lot of work and put in a lot of work. So I'm really interested to see what level he can reach. I think he was at the Benfica Academy, so he might be a bit of a cheat code in the sense that he has had a bit of the European development, but at the same time, he's now playing in the A-League regularly, and I think he's 21 years old. So whether he goes back to sort of Portuguese league or that level would be really interesting. But I really liked what I saw from him in the limited game time. The other player that I was most interested in from a data perspective, and again, I've tried to watch at least like clips here and there, but haven't caught as many games, was Will Dobson at Newcastle Jets. So in a recent magazine, our first sort of online magazine that we changed the style of, we started developing this profile that's becoming more popular in this end-to-end transition league. Of I used a Lord of the Rings reference to call it a berserker, because that's how I like profiling the players. But essentially, it's someone that receives the ball and constantly looks forward, and especially with carrying the ball past the second line and then unleashing shots and passes without any real consideration of how difficult they might be. Obviously, you couldn't have a whole team of those players because you'd never have the ball, but they're specifically useful in the transition phase, and they're specifically useful in trying things that the data or the efficient players will pass up. So he profiled really strongly for, as I mentioned earlier, like within the A League, he was one of the top sprinters from midfield. So that was interesting. But again, yes, that's top in the A League, but how scalable is it and how much will it affect him going forward? But he ranked highly for two metrics. One was carries at speed. So that is someone carrying the ball towards the goal or a distance on the pitch above a certain speed threshold. So it shows their ability to reach speeds with the ball at the feet, something that we touched on earlier about how, yes, being fast is one thing, but can you be fast with the ball? So he's profiled really strongly for that among midfielders. And there's another one that's forward momentum, which measures how often a player will receive on the half turn and their next action will be towards the goal. So as a stylistic player, he was really interesting because that's someone that has no inhibition about trying to attack. Yes, he might not be super efficient in those actions, but those are the sort of approaches to a match that would stand out to me as someone that I'd look for. And then you do the scouting to be like, okay, he's trying all of this, but he's actually executing it really bad, or he's trying all of this and he actually hasn't had a shot on target from 70 efforts. There could be issues there, but as a 17-year-old to be ranking highly for this and playing regularly and looking to do things that are difficult to do, that was really impressive to me. So I don't know if you have any insight from when you've watched him play at any level.
Yeah, so Ocon and Dobson, those are two very interesting cases you looked at. You basically had two of the four players. I would say five. There's one player who's not getting game time, who I think, if they got game time, would have a light potential. But you mentioned two of the four, which is very interesting. So Paul Ocon, what's really impressive about him is he doesn't need a lot of separation from his marker to be effective in receiving the ball. He can be basically crowded and get the ball forward. Will Dobson was a player always catches my eye when they're that young and they don't look like they're drowning. They're holding their own. And so but he was one of those players which I saw, and as you say, because he releases the ball quickly, you can miss his quality. Uh, and then I started noticing, and this is where maybe people who are a bit snobbish about, say, FootMob apps or whatever, that sometimes those apps tell you something which you're missing. He was getting high scores. So it's like, okay, what's he doing? And as you say, because he doesn't spend a lot of time on the ball, and it takes a bit of time to see exactly what his quality is. And yeah, he's coming into his own. His games are getting better and better, as far as I can see. Poor Ocon at the moment, he had a real lull in form after he played for the Socceroos in North America. I think just the physical challenges of that. I think I've seen many Aussies just really decline for basically a month sometimes when they first get used to that. It's really hard, the jet lag and the extra games. But he's recently come back and been able to probably had his best game of his career last weekend. The two players I mentioned, which maybe didn't make the cut there, I'd be very interested to see if I'm seeing them with rose-colored glasses or not. So one is Dylan Shikluna. So he's a surprisingly short player, which I guess you could say on the ball he plays like a short player, and off the ball he plays like a tall player. He's the amount of times he can get the ball off people he has no right to get is just incredible in a match. And the other one is Lucas Harrington. And
Yeah.
both of those cases, both on and off the ball, really, really have impressed me, caught my eye. I think every single one of these players is technically a dual national, so we're all very anxious about that in Australia, about whether we get to see these players we get attached to ever put on the Socceroos jersey. But yeah, so I don't know if you have either of those players in your database.
Yeah, so Harrington is someone that he was actually the sort of reason for this article, because he was someone that I noticed was playing really young and then did the move. So it was like, okay, not only are A-League players young, they're actually being spotted, and he went to Colorado for, I think, it was a record fee for Brisbane Raw. So this is the thing. It's like, mate, yes, I'm jumping on one thing that's happened, but like this is the hope that can develop for more players. And I think MLS, another one of the top 5 record deals, was he was too old for the players I was looking at in this, because I think he just turned 23 or 24. But someone signed for Philadelphia Union, another centre back. That the name escapes me at the moment, but Alex Bonetig went from Western to
Yeah.
Portland Timbers, I think. I might have butchered the last name, but essentially, Lucas Harrington was the poster boy of the example of what could happen, right? So you've got someone that is really efficient at taking the ball off opposition players. And again, his physicals weren't centre back in general is an absolute minefield for how you're monitoring physicals because it all depends on what they're asked to do. Because a centre back is very rarely running forward unless they're playing in a back three. So immediately you've got position bias of someone that's got high sprint metrics for a centre back is probably likely just playing in a role that asks them to sprint, or they are literally the last line of defense and they have to constantly sprint back to deal with opposition strikers. So Harrington's physicals weren't great, but that's not a limiting factor. Again, what I found interesting about him was that some places said he was like 5'10", and then some places said he was 6'4". So he's someone that's obviously was a good player, but now has grown and now has the stature that, again, some people do just filter by height. Some people will think that you can't be a successful centre back without being 6'3". And that's again another example of physical and athletic traits being a barrier for progress. But he seems to have fallen into the bracket that it, it suits him. And all of the research that I did on him was basically someone that's extremely efficient in winning his duels, and both on the ground and in the air, which is a very rare balance to have. So again, the scouting question is how efficient is he in these duels relative to his athletic disparity between the other A-League players? Is he showing technical skills when he's winning these duels that are scalable to even if you face someone that, even if you're going against Erling Haaland? So how does he use his body to win tackles? How does he use his body to position in the air? Those are all the scouting questions, but from a data percentage, he basically profiled as a brick wall that not many people got change out of, and then immediately started. I think he started every game, or he started the first 3 games for Colorado uh, at centre back. So he's someone that I'm going to be tracking just to see how he develops, because that will be a good example of. I think he had mini breakout half season, or played like 11 games and then played 11 games this season. So that 20-game barrier. Earlier you asked about when's the time to leave. I think you said it was a 26-game season. Basically, as soon as you've got 20 to 30 games under your belt in the A-League, you probably would have convinced someone that you're either good enough or not good enough. And he certainly seems to have done that. So be very interesting to see if he keeps moving on from MLS, because I think he's still only 18, isn't he? So he could have 4 years there, develop physically, fill out his frame. And as I said, he's got the height, he's got ticks all of the boxes to make a move to English football.
Okay, so how about Dylan Shikluna?
So he's not someone that came up in the article, but again, that doesn't mean he's not good. And this is again the benefits of scouting by watching games as well as pouring through data. But just a snapshot of what he seems to do data wise is, again, physicals and distance wise, you'd be his top speed looks good, but then he's not doing a lot of the actions frequently in the match. But again, some people will just use that top speed as we can train him to repeat that more often. But what stands out is his sort of like on the ball ability in this data. Seems to be someone that again passes forward quite frequently, but seems to do it from the base of midfield. So again, this is me basing it off data points I'm looking at. This could be wrong about his style of play, but seems to be someone that will sit and dictate possession. Does that match up with perceptions of him, or
Yeah,
does he add more
absolutely.
to that?
Yeah, so last year he was maybe one of the best at winning the ball for his position, already at quite a young age. He did his ACL, and then I think though people thought, okay, this is a really good profile to go to, say, your Scotland sort of league or your Austria or your Denmark sort of thing. But this year he's maybe even been better than Paul Oaken, at least to the eyes and passing it forwards and progressing it. And so now he's looks like the best player off the ball and the best player on the ball. And so that's caused a little bit of hype in some of the more hardcore circles around Australian football.
There's also another player that didn't really have enough games yet to have a data profile that was, one, he would have appeared on the databases, and two, there's not enough there to actually analyze really, was Ako Akon, the 16-year-old that on his first start got 3 assists in a derby. So he's an example of someone that we spoke about at the beginning, where if you are 16 and you're playing, there must be something about what you're doing. So he's someone that when I do my searches for the youngest players that have played, he started popping up. The fact that in his first start, he provided those 3 assists. And then also in the article, because he doesn't have the robust data profile, I just did a snapshot of his data from that particular match. And again, they weren't out otherworldly stats, but his stats within the game that stood out were his top speed. So we know already at a young age that he's already hitting decent speed that, especially for a winger, you'll need. But also the accelerations and the decelerations specifically were really high, and I think only a couple of players within the game itself bettered him for both of those metrics. So again, from a data point, and I've tried to watch a few clips. Again, he's not played much, but he ticks all of those boxes that we spoke about. Like the decelerations is really interesting, shows that he's willing to press and can close those distances. That's compounded or augmented by the top speed that he's got. And also he's extremely young and being trusted with first team minutes. So I wanted to ask you really if you had any insight on watching him play at various levels, not just senior levels, if he's played for any of the youth international leagues, that he's someone that I'm also wanting to monitor very closely.
Yeah, so I did watch him at under 17s, and it did look very different to Sydney FC. So for Sydney FC, the game, I don't know if you watched the game, it was all chaos, all action. There's so much chaos that is confusing his teammates and not just his opposition. But in the end, through that chaos, there's the 3 assists, which is obviously very positive. But, obviously the decision making, is still developing. And his occasionally some rough moments on the ball, but then also some brilliant moments on the ball, showing that there's some technical potential there as well as outstanding physical potential. For youth, there was less chaos. It's just quality. He was a standout for under 17s, and it's too early to tell whether that chaos and roughness and rawness is coming from the adjustment to senior football due to the nerves in front of playing in a stadium. Obviously, our stadiums aren't as full as English stadiums, but they can still be nervous, have a lot of nervous energy, and how much there are still some improvement areas. So he is a player I'm hoping to get more game time. I'm not a scout, so it usually takes me about 20 games before I form an opinion on a player. I have to watch the player closer. It takes me a while to pick things up, watching Aussies abroad in other leagues or at home to find out what their weaknesses and qualities are. But from the small sample size, yeah, you can see that there's flair. You can see that there's the ability to have a good touch and an ability to do good technical actions, but not consistently, at least in that game. And speed and acceleration and effort, but a lot of chaos. That'd be my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, that's, as I said, it's there's not enough game time, even within his matches probably, but it's just always interesting when someone that young gets propelled forward. So yeah, someone that I'm looking to follow, and just an example of how young the league is getting. Like, I don't know how common it used to be for these 16, 17-year-olds to be playing, but the graph at the top of the article documented how many under 21 players and how many teenagers were playing in the league since 2005. And in these last 2 years, it's reached 150 under 21 players making an appearance in the league, and about 70 teenagers, compared to, I know it's going back a long way, but 2005 it was 25. So that's just an example of the scale of why this league will start garnering interest. And as silly as it sounds, the ability to spot the next thing is actually a really big pull for a lot of people. especially people trying to make it in the game. So if the A League earns a reputation of, okay, Lucas Harrington gone to MLS, now everyone's talking about him. Where did he come from? Oh, A League team. Maybe I'll watch a few more games there. Then you start getting people write more about the players that they're watching within these leagues, following Australia at the youth tournaments, because I know Ocon had a pretty solid tournament in the Under-20 World Cup as well. And I saw a lot of people saying, oh, it's nice to see him pop up in your article because I watched him at that tournament. So in terms of just global recognition of the league, it's not a nice tag to maybe, or people, it's probably got a bit of negative connotation, but if you can be known as a league that's introducing people to a new generation of player and has got a good hit rate for developing young players, then it does attract people like myself that are looking at bettering their own sort of scouting practices and again the ability to find someone before everyone else has started writing about him. So it's really exciting to see if this continues or whether we now start to see this level go up because of these young players that have had the new academy upbringings. If they start to dominate the league and as they get more minutes, they set the standard.
So, last question before we wrap up: who's one person that's playing in the A League, a young player that wasn't analysed in the article, but everyone should be talking about a bit more?
So another player that I'm really interested to follow is Besian Kutleshi at Melbourne City. And again, he's not played enough yet in the senior A League to get a robust data profile to look at. So this is purely based on what happens when someone that's just turned 17 is in the senior squad. That's interesting to me. Again, the positional sort of versatility already. I think at youth level he plays centre back. At senior level he's been used at right back. And I think he's played on the left sometimes as well when looking at previous games. So immediately, just a defender to be trusted at first team level is much rarer than platforming a winger because there's less jeopardy if they do make a mistake that they are expected to make when they're young. The fact that he's got decent frame, the fact that he's got that exposure to first team football, and also has got that ability to maybe be a very meta-sympathetic profile. So we see a lot of right backs that are midfielders now. We see a lot of centre backs playing at right back because they're doing a more reserved role. And just his general base profile, which, as I said, I don't have lots behind it. This is very much someone I just want to follow more. He seems like someone to track because, again, he ticks a lot of boxes for if you're buying a defensive prospect that could develop in any way based on if he grows more, if he gets quicker. So that malleability of like profile, he's got a lot of base points that you'd want in a player. Yeah, the fact that he made his debut at 16 means that there must be something that's going on there. So he's one that I didn't quite get time to get stuck into, or rather there wasn't enough sample size to form a data profile for him, but he ticks all of the boxes for wanting to scout further as he gets more exposure to senior football.
I'm also very excited to follow Kurt Leshy. He's been very interesting and played a few Asian Champions League games if you need more data as well. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's on your database. So thank you so much for joining us, Jake. Please follow him at Scouted and also on Twitter. And also join us on the forum at greengoldfc.com. We're also on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Please hit that like and subscribe button. But for this week, that's all we have time for. Until next time, is bye for now.